You know how Die Hard and Lethal Weapon are now considered classic Christmas movies? Well, here are you some recommendations for books, regardless of what your favorite holiday. Hey guys, Pat Parker here with 52 Books, coming at you from another of my favorite reading nooks, and that is my bed. What could be better than laying down at the end of a long day with a good book? Well, the downside to that is I always pass out after a few sentences, so I don't get much reading done, but nonetheless, this is one of my favorite places to read. All right, today I've got for you some fantasy novel recommendations for novels related to your favorite holidays. All the standard disclaimers apply. This is all subjective. Your mileage might vary. But with that said, let's just jump right into it. All right, New Year's Day. What this holiday is all about is the passage of time, turning another page in the calendar, and aging, that sort of thing. Maybe making resolutions for what the future is going to be like. So here are you some suggestions for books with those themes. The first one is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. This was written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That's right, that F. Scott Fitzgerald, the same one that did The Great Gatsby and all that. It's about a guy that ages backwards. So it's sort of a subversion of the New Year's baby thing. The second recommendation for New Year's is Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Neffenegger. I haven't read this one, but from the blurb and from the movie, I can tell you it is about a fellow who hops back and forth to different times in his own lifetime. But he does not do it with any control. It is like an illness that afflicts him. And just when he gets going good in this time, boom, he's some other time in his life. The third recommendation for New Year's is The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I think that this is a Groundhog Day sort of thing, where the fellow lives out his lifetime and wakes up the next day at the beginning of his lifetime again, or something to that effect. And the last one is The Book of M by Ping Shepherd. It is about some sort of global catastrophe or apocalypse or something that causes people to begin losing their memories. Well, that is just like the lyrics to Auld Lang Syne, which everybody likes to sing on New Year's, right? Okay, the next holiday or series of holidays is MLK Day, Juneteenth, and Kwanzaa. If you are into these holidays, then you might be into black authors or books with black protagonists. So here's you a list of good ones. The first one is actually my absolute favorite fantasy series of all, and that is Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, Le Guin, everybody knows, spent her entire long career busting stereotypes. And Earthsea, which I think is her crowning achievement, is about a boy who grows up to be a wizard. This was written, 40 some odd years before Harry Potter was thought up, but it's all about this boy that goes to wizard school and becomes a wizard, and all the things, the trials and tribulations that accompany that. And the characters in the book just happen to be dark-skinned. So So that would count for this MLK tag. The next one is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I have not read it, but it came up in a list of excellent black author novels. The next one is Fifth Season. Likewise, I have not read this one, but it seems to be popular on YouTube with the booktubers these days. Now the next one, Dread Nation by Justina Ireland, seems to me to be the one that I would be most interested in reading sometime in the immediate future. It seems from the blurb that it is about the slave trade between Africa and the Americas, and except the twist, the fantasy twist, is that there are sea creatures and zombies and that sort of thing. So it is sort of a alternate history of the slave trade with some fantasy elements thrown in. All right, the last of the MLK Juneteenth Kwanzaa recommendations would be the grandmother of African American authors, and that would be Octavia Butler, who wrote Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. You know, just a few years back, you might have been hard pressed to find any books written by African Americans or blacks, or any fantasy books with black protagonists. But Octavia Butler came along sometime in the late 80s or the early 90s and busted that wide open, so that all these other authors like N.K. Jemisin and Adeyemi could come along and start fixing the lack of African American authors. Okay, the next set of holidays is Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and if these are your favorite holidays, then I bet you will love military or political fantasy. And the first one obviously has to be Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, especially I think the second and third books get into these massive battles. The first book is sort of setting it all up and dealing with a handful of individual characters, but by the time the second book rolls along, the characters are embroiled in massive battles, and so that would be the first recommendation. You can't really talk about military or political fantasy without getting into George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones. I have a curious relationship with Game of Thrones because I tried for years and years to read it and couldn't get through it. I made, I don't know, 6 or 8 abortive attempts to read this thing and couldn't get through it. But everybody keeps raving about it, so I, at the beginning of this year, forced myself to drag myself through it. And it was not awful, it was not great, it was just sort of mediocre until the end of the first book. And let me tell you, the last handful of chapters in that book are some of the the finest fantasy that I have read by anyone, anytime. So I'm looking forward to continuing the series. And like Lord of the Rings, this is another one that builds into the massive battles in the second book. But it is it's full of political intrigue. It's about all these factions and people that are vying with each other to control the seven kingdoms, to sit on the Iron Throne and be the king of the seven kingdoms. So if you like military fiction or political fiction, intrigue, you'll like Game of Thrones. The next one would be Dune. Dune is another very political novel, and it is about these noble families that are contesting with each other to control this this planet that is the only resource in the universe for this spice that they need, this this drug that they need. So it's a very fiercely competitive political intrigue. That's Dune by Frank Herbert. Now, this next one is one of my favorite military fantasies ever, and that is The Deed of Paxenarian by Elizabeth Moon. Deed of Paxenarian is the name of the series of books. The first book is titled Sheep Farmer's Daughter, and the series is about the daughter of this sheep farmer, this shepherdess, that runs away from home because she doesn't want to be married to somebody that they want her to be married to or something. But she joins the army, and the book is extremely detailed about the training and the preparation that she has in the army for all these battles. And then it becomes rich battlefield experience, and she climbs the ranks until she actually becomes a paladin later on in the series. So The Deed of Paxenarian, I would totally recommend that for anybody that loves military fantasy. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is grimdark. It is gritty, fighting down in the mud, hopeless sort of situations with morally gray characters. Sounds kind of dismal, but I loved it, and so does everybody else that has ever read it. Joe Abercrombie is like one of the handful of kings of BookTube now, because everybody is just gushing about how fantastic Joe Abercrombie is, and The Blade Itself is a great place to get started with Joe Abercrombie. All right, guys, we are to July 4th, and I'm not going to recommend the Independence Day movie by Will Smith, although it's not terrible, but I've got some other recommendations for you here. The first one, well, let me tell you about what the holiday's about. If you enjoy July 4th, then you probably have happy memories or nostalgia about summertime and watermelon and family reunions and coming of age and fireflies and that sort of thing. So if you like coming of age and you like fantasy, here are some of the handful of best coming of age fantasies that there are. And what I mean by that is that passage, that in-between time, that awkward time, when a protagonist goes from being a child to being an adult. And most of the authors put this sometime around 11 or 12 or 13. And in the context of fantasy novels, coming of age means making that passage under duress or with some sort of fantasy happenings or elements or that sort of thing. You'll see what I mean. So the first one is like even if you've been under a stone for the last 30 years, you will have heard of Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. This is a coming of age. It's about a kid who goes off to magic school to become a wizard. Each successive book in the series is another year in this kid's education. So Harry Potter is growing up through the series, and he is being challenged by all the events and the people that he meets and this dark enemy in the book. All right, Hunger Games is another one that is a coming of age. I read it way back before it was a movie when it first came out, and really enjoyed it. I think lately it may have become oversaturated a bit, and so it may be the butt of some jokes or some distaste or that sort of thing. But I really enjoyed it up until the end. The end was a train wreck, both in the book and the movie. But you can just disregard the end of the story. Stephen King. A lot of booktubers say that Stephen King is the master of coming of age fantasy. And stories like The Body, which was made into the movie titled Stand By Me, and the book It, that's right, the one with the evil clown. Both of these stories are about these groups of kids that are in that awkward in-between age, and they encounter duress or obstacles to that coming of age. In It, the obstacle is a evil creature that appears to people to be a clown. In The Body, it is a story about these kids that take a long, like a 20 or 30 mile hike in order to see this dead body, this guy that got hit by a train or something. And the emotions and the ideas that these obstacles bring to the kids pushes them through that coming of age. This one I'm reading right now, and I'm totally loving it. Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. Now, this is another author like George R.R. Martin that I have had a rocky relationship with. I keep reading Dan Simmons books, and I keep hating them. He wrote Hyperion, which is widely considered by a lot of people to be like the greatest science fiction ever written, and I just plain hated it. He wrote a book called Ilium about the Trojan War, but it's on Mars. It wasn't all that. He wrote the book The Terror, which was about the sailing ship that got trapped in the ice, and there's something hunting them. It was 2 or 3 times longer than it needed to be, and bored me to tears. But people keep talking about Dan Simmons this and Dan Simmons that. Well, I came across a reviewer that said that Dan Simmons's Summer of Night is the greatest coming of age fantasy ever. And this reviewer gushed and gushed about how great it was. So I got a copy and picked it up, and I'm totally loving it. I am a little bit less than halfway through it, and it is a slow burn. But right in the beginning, he introduces you to a cast of, I don't know, 8 or 12 kids that are in that in-between age. They're 11 or so years old, and they are in a small town, bucolic setting in 1960, and they are trying to get through this this coming of age. But creepy, scary things keep popping up, and there's something weird going on in this town. And one of the things that I love most about this book is almost every chapter, if not every chapter, ends with something, with a paragraph or so about something dark or slimy, slithering in the dark just outside the protagonist's line of sight, or while they're doing something, they don't see the mysterious things flying in the sky. So there are these teasers at the end of just about every chapter about the weird happenings that are happening that these kids are slowly beginning to catch on to, and which are building towards this grand explosion of weird and horror. Now, all of these sort of pay homage, all of these authors sort of pay homage back to Ray Bradbury. He wrote a book called Dandelion Wine, which is basically the same type of deal. It's a coming-of-age story set in a bucolic setting in the 1940s, and it has been highly recommended to me. So I got a copy of it, and I'm totally looking forward to that one. Also, I got a copy of Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. This is another coming-of-age under duress book, and I read it a good long time ago and remember some about it. It is about, again, a kid about that age, 11 or 12 or 13, in rural Alabama. But the thing that makes Robert McCammon's Boy's Life remarkable in my memory is it is not only coming of age, but it is also sort of Southern Gothic, which is a subgenre of fantasy that involves supernatural, legendary creatures, voodoo, mysterious animals like the rougarou or giant talking catfish, or the swamp monsters, or the Bigfoot, or these sorts of things. These not urban legends, but legends that give the South flavor. So Robert McCammon's book is a wonderful mashup of coming of age and Southern Gothic, and I've got it reread on my TBR for later this year. Okay, so if Halloween or All Saints Day or Day of the Dead are your favorite holidays, they're not mine, but if they are yours, cool. And here are some book recommendations. I promise you, I will not give you any Stephen King recommendations, although I could. You could reasonably pair virtually anything that he wrote with the spooky season. But I've got some other books for you. The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman is a great example. Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is the Shirley Jackson that wrote The Lottery that we had to read in school a million years ago. So it's kind of an older horror or spooky fantasy, and it's written by an author that was acclaimed to us in school. Now, if you're going to make recommendations for Halloween reading, I would be amiss if I failed to mention the classics like Dracula by Bram Stoker, or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I would totally recommend any of those. We read Frankenstein in college as part of a science fiction class that I took. And later this year, during the spooky season, I have on my TBR a reread of Jekyll and Hyde, along with a first-time reading for me of Mary Riley, which is a retelling of Jekyll and Hyde from another character's point of view. So I would recommend those. Recently on BookTube, The Exorcist by Peter Blatty has been getting a lot of hype, and all of my favorite booktubers are telling me that the book is way better than the movie. So that might be on my TBR. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Here he is again, cropping up as a classic science fiction and fantasy author. Something Wicked has been noted as being a big influence on Stephen King in his writing. And if I remember, I read it like a million years ago when I was a teenager. And if I remember right, it is about this weird supernatural carnival that comes to town and all the weirdness and shenanigans that accompany that. Okay, we've gotten to my favorite holiday, and that is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is all about nostalgia and family and food and the smells and autumn. And so if you enjoy those things like I do, then you will probably enjoy this list of books. Now this first one might be a stretch. The fantasy elements in it are minimal. So it's sort of, you could consider it literary fiction, or if you choose to, you could consider it fantasy. And that is Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. When I read the blurb for this book, the only fantasy element in it comes right at the beginning, and the rest of the book is all about nostalgia and food. So I think that would be a fun read for the Thanksgiving season. Another similar book would be Chocolat by Joanne Harris. However, that one is set specifically during Lent, during the Lent season. But again, it is about nostalgia and family and food and that sort of thing. Bear and Nightingale. When I was researching Thanksgiving books, this is the one that sounds most interesting to me. Bear and Nightingale by Catherine Arden. It is a retelling of the Russian fairy tale about Vasilika. And depending on how close a retelling it is, we're liable to have Baba Yaga, the famous witch, pop up in this one. And she's one of my favorite characters in fantasy literature and in fairy tales, is Baba Yaga, the witch. Speaking of which, later in the year, I have a rereading of Orson Scott Card's book titled Enchantment, which is about modern day adventures and misadventures of Baba Yaga. So I'm looking forward to that one. Neil Gaiman's Ocean at the End of the Lane was also recommended to me as being a Thanksgiving sort of nostalgia, family sort of book. I don't know. I haven't read it, but I like Neil Gaiman. Virtually everything that I have read of his. And I have a daughter that gushes over Neil Gaiman. So I would love to read Ocean at the End of the Lane, and the Graveyard book that I mentioned earlier. All right, in this last holiday of the season, or one of the early holidays in the next year, would be Christmas and Easter. And these would be books, religious books, religious fantasies, specifically Christian fantasies. One that springs immediately to mind is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. About, everybody's seen it. Most people have read it. It is about the mean old Ebenezer Scrooge and his encounter with the ghosts, the spirits of Christmas. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis is a good one. It is, again, most folks have probably read it or seen it. It's about this group of children that find their way through this magical closet or wardrobe, into another world called Narnia. And they find in this book that a evil witch has enchanted or cursed Narnia such that it is always winter but never Christmas. And not to spoil it or anything, I don't know if you can spoil The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because everybody has read it or seen it. But Santa Claus makes an appearance late in the book. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is also interesting to me because way back in the day when I first encountered this Chronicles of Narnia series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was considered to be the first book. One of my sister-in-laws bought me for Christmas a boxed set of all 7 of them, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the first one. Well, the stories don't actually go in that order. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not chronologically the first in the series of stories. So at some later point, they started making, I think, The Magician's Nephew the first book in the series. So that's just a little bit of trivia about how old I am. Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. This one was also made into a movie. It is based on the premise that this group of nefarious people, for whatever reason, have decided that they need to assassinate Santa Claus. Except he is so powerful that they can't get a hold of him. They can't catch him. So they have to find the Tooth Fairy and use the Tooth Fairy's power to try to catch Santa Claus. This is written by Terry Pratchett, who is an undisputed master of sort of funny, clever, absurdist fantasy. He likes to take fantasy tropes, and about the time you think you know where this is going, he subverts it and turns it on its ear in a funny way. So that's Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. All right, this final recommendation is another of my all-time favorites, and that is Catherine Kurtz's Derenni novels. It's a lot of different trilogies. I don't remember how many, but it's 5 or 6 trilogies of books. And I think you can start virtually anywhere, but the place that it seems that makes the most sense to me to start is with the book titled Camber of Culdee. It is about this fellow named Camber who is sort of destined through the actions of this book to become a saint in the Catholic Church of this world, and later a heretic and sort of antichrist figure. The premise of the Derenni novels is, what if you have Dark Ages, Middle Ages type setting with a strong Catholic Church and strong monarchy, but half the population has these mental powers that border on magic. They are magic. And so there's also this political intrigue where this central character, Camber of Culdee, he comes upon the realization that the king that is sitting the throne now is a usurper, and they think that there's no living heir to the proper line of kings except some of his, I think his son-in-law discovers that one of the heirs actually is alive over here, and they have to agonize with their own souls about whether it is right to usurp the throne. And it is just a fantastic fantasy. Lots of political intrigue, but the setting of the Catholic Church, to me, makes it fit in with the Christmas, Easter religious fantasy theme. Okay, if you enjoy this sort of content, don't be bashful about hitting like and subscribe and ringing the bell and all that, because it'll help out.